go. So now it's being recorded. So really the aim of this course is just to do a lot of relaxation and then create a piece that you can work on into. We don't often get them finished in one session because there's so much more detail we can discover. There's my hand, you see I'm live, in the work. So really the idea is to get the whole process started and give you a piece you can go away and work on as the week goes on. So I'm just going to get, first of all, a nice big brush with some water on it just to wet down the paper. So I use a fairly big brush. I've got a slightly new studio set up again, and I'm having trouble with my headphones. I can't, the new port on my computer is on the wrong side for my headphones, so I just need to slightly move my monitor around so I can stretch a bit further. That's better. I was about to pull everything off the desk, which wouldn't have gone well. So again, just some water onto the surface. This is a brush I got in a set from the Works. They were great. They've got a whole range of sizes and they're on sale for about £2 for 6 brushes. And I'm quite a fan of finding cheap and cheerful alternatives, particularly when it's something like this. It's just very relaxed and creative. You don't have to feel you've got to pay £30 for a brush. I'm literally just going to paint the whole of this paper in water to start off with, just to dampen it down. I've attached it to a board with some masking tape. You can do it all properly and stretch your watercolour paper with pleasure. I just haven't. I don't bother. I find that if anything gets really crinkly, you can give it a good iron. If you put it between 2 sheets of thin paper and have a dry iron and give it a nice press, that'll sort out most of the wrinkles. And sometimes it's the wrinkles and bumps that can create interesting patterns. So I said we're going to just start with some really abstract areas of colour, which we can then work into. I'm going to start off with a pink colour, just sort of maybe in the middle. Literally just going to mix up my pan and see what I can come up with, just because I want an area of pinkness in the middle of the painting. I'm keeping it quite fluid and quite watery to begin with. I don't want to put too much thick colour on, and what we're hoping is that things are going to move and sort of change. So I'm just going to put a brush through the middle of the paper, and because I'm working vertically, I get a lot of vertical movement and spread coming out, and that I think works really nicely. You can work on the flat and you get a different kind of feel. You're going to get something more like a drop or a drip. You can also, and we will try this more later on in the course, but we can turn the paper around and kind of move our gravity around. So I started with a very pale pink kind of wash, and then I'm just going back over and adding some stripes of stronger pigment just on the top. So I've got a sort of haze of pink with a kind of a stronger bit in the middle, almost just like a glow of pink coming through. I'm just going to slightly tilt my camera up there. So, and obviously if you're more of a pink person, you can put a stronger pink in. You can go for a red if you're more of a red person, if you feel like being red. But I'm just going to keep on adding stronger and stronger layers of paint just into that central section. So I've got the initial kind of light spread of paint there, and then I've just got a little dark section. If you feel at any point you've got any lines that you don't like, you can always just come back with some water and just dab that over and kind of get that to run. What I love is when you get really beautiful drips and drops happening and sort of blooms, so you can even go in and just sort of dab on. I'm just using the corner of the brush because I'm too involved to worry about reaching different brushes, so I'm just maybe using the corner of the brush just to add a couple of spots or moments of pink. And again, if you put them on and you think, oh, they look a bit too chicken poxy, too dotty, just come in with some water and soften them out a bit and make them larger and expand. So that's kind of like a pink floating mist in the middle of my page, and that's, for me, for this one, that's kind of all the pink I'm going to do. Just add a bit of extra water, give that a run. So now we're going to go, I'm going to kind of have blues up on this side above my pink and then going down into greens across here. So we'll see what kind of feeling that gives us. So I'm going in for a nice sort of Mediterranean sky blue, the kind of blue sky that we really did not see this summer and that we're all slightly craving, I think. So that's a lovely sort of turquoise, plenty of pigment, washing it up so it's sort of a 50-50 water and paint kind of mix like that. And then and I don't worry at all about that blue heading down into the green that's going to be green down there. And I love some of these delicious runs that you get. And what's great about this is that, of course, we're all getting different moments and runs and floods of colour. And I'm just sort of leaving it so that we're going to get a little bit of mixing here, or kind of just a slight overlap, but I'm just working around that pink as if it's sort of something I'm trying to preserve. And we also find that the paper's starting to dry a bit as we work, so it'll mean that our pigment will move differently on the slightly drier paper, and that's cool too, because we can find all sorts of other shapes of coming round here. So we just add on blue on this side, and if you've got a little once you've got some pigment on, you can come back with a wet brush, and I kind of almost push the brush against the paper just to get sort of things to move. I get quite a nice square almost sort of bit here, which I do quite like, but as we're kind of going to look at circles, I'm going to slightly soften that, because otherwise it's going to be too squarish for circles to happen. And then again, once I've got some blue on, I can come in with the corner of the brush and start maybe putting some sort of circle shapes on, just some points of blue. Again, to me that's now looking a bit too spotty, so I'm going to come back with water and just again get that to run a bit more and soften a bit more, so it's not too, I don't want it to look like, again, like sort of splats, you know. I want sort of something softer, so it's sort of quite fluid. I think it'd be quite nice to get a different tone of blue in, so I'm going to go for, again, just a slightly, come back over on the side I've already painted and add in a slightly different, it doesn't look massively different, but it's a slightly different shade of blue just to come in. And again, because the paper's already got paint on, that kind of changes the surface, and it's maybe starting to dry a little bit, so it's changing how quickly things can want to move across it, which gives us something different to sort of think about. I should probably change the shape of my brush. I'm going to go for a roundy brush. She said picking up a square brush because the roundy brush is hiding. Here he is, come here. Oh no, he's right, just out of reach. There's one that isn't. So I'm tethered with my headphones, that's the problem. And then I'm going to come in with the round brush and start adding in, again, some texture moments of blue. And I'm hoping that you're starting to see something that is, you know, we want something to play with, we want something that's quite interesting. So some of these sort of spreading kind of moments, we're going to start adding on to some of those just to find some lovely blue moments. I've got quite a big white space on this side. I don't know at the moment, I might leave that, because sometimes it's quite nice to have space and emptiness sort of in there as well to contrast with the darker moments. But I'm coming in, I'm trying to get, let me just tilt my camera a tiny bit up to the top. There you go. I'm trying to get quite a dark colour, and I've got sort of the paper's quite dry at the top here, so I can sort of just press my brush on and get some darker kind of dappling of paint in. And again, if you ever feel that what you've got is too hard or static, or you don't like it, again, just pump some water from your brush through it to kind of soften it and let it run so that it's doing something different. Here we go. So that's quite nice. I'm quite liking that sort of building up there. I've got a nice sort of flood coming down this side, which I'm quite enjoying. I think here I want to put some, like something relatively round and just significant, like a sort of circle kind of coming in. And then you can do some circles kind of coming around that, and it almost starts to look like ripples maybe, or something like that. One thing I have, which I haven't asked you to bring, but I'll show you, which is quite useful and quite good fun, is one of these spray bottles that you get for spraying your house plants. I don't expect you to have one now, but you can just do things like go in and spray bits, and it kind of creates, I'm just going to show you quickly, but you can kind of give it a blast, and it kind of just sort of like, ooh, creates a really nice kind of quite chaotic surface. So you can come in and it sort of sprays and then sort of like shoots and you get like a sort of explosion. If you don't want to, if you've got a cleaning product bottle, like a spray kitchen cleaner or something, do keep one of those, because we should be trying to find ways to recycle them because they're difficult to recycle. So clean it out, give it a good clean so there's no kitchen product in there, and then you can use it for forever pretty much as a spray. And it's really good to get a nice sort of overall wetness, and you can sort of shoot it and get lovely sort of explosions happening, which is quite exciting. Right, so I've got, at the moment I'm quite happy with my blue, and I've got my pink going through it. You see what I mean by it is really, really abstract, and it's great because we just don't know yet what we're going to find in it. So I want to get some green coming down here, so sort of like so it's not quite land and sky, but there's kind of that hint then, isn't there, of it sort of being, sort of helps orientate it a bit. So green, again, you might want to go for a sea green with a bit of blue in first of all. So I've got kind of like a pine green, I think it's probably called, or a sort of forest green, that kind of colour. So I'm just going to tilt down a tiny bit so you can see, because I want to go sort of more into the bottom. There we go, come on camera, that is just about the bottom of my paper. So again, I'm going to come in and just put some brush loads of green in. I think, having said that we're going to try turning the paper around later, I think it might be quite fun to try it on this actually. So we'll see. So I'm just starting off with some green. I've got a nice hole there, so at the moment I'm going to leave that because I think that's quite an interesting shape. If it gets covered up later, so be it. But for the moment I'm going to leave it. So I'm just bringing in some stripes of kind of green coming through there. And then let's turn it around. Let's do that. Go on, let's see. I feel that the mood has taken me. I think we need to turn our paper around. So I'm just going to move my board, maybe just sort of round that far. There we go. So that's now I've got the green on here. So I'm going to go back and put some more greens on there. I want to get some quite dark tones in there because we've got some darkness up here, and I want to very much balance it with the green. I don't want it to be too. I don't want this to be lighter. I want it definitely to become darker. So I'm going to mix up some of my sort of bluey greeny paint, and let's get some more pigment onto it here. Let's just brush it up in a nice long brush and just kind of get some more kind of green colour in. And then if I get the round brush again, and I want to get some of these round shapes, and there's plenty of paint and it's all starting to come across, so it's good. So we've got a different angle, we've got a different motion coming through. We've got this way of the blue, then the green is going a slightly different plane. It gives us a slightly different angle. I'm just going to build that, and I kind of build circles of the green now, just using the paint off the straight off the palette without too much water in it, so we're getting stronger kind of shapes coming through. I know we're getting a little bit of gleam. I don't know if I just tilt that round a bit. It's coming from the light above. It's just picking up a little bit on the lights, but once it's dried off, you're going to be able to see more kind of what it's doing. But I'm just sort of getting some larger areas of green sort of circles in that we can work in. And then once you've got some circles, you can go back and use some other colour to kind of pick them up a bit. And another thing, if you've got anything dry handy, like a tissue or a dry paintbrush, you can just, or even just your finger, you can come in, and I'm just got a little bit of tissue here, and where you've got a green circle, you can come in and kind of edit it out and take some of the green out. So if you just have a little bit of tissue or a finger or dry paintbrush, you can come in and then dab it on and then lift, and you kind of lift that centre out of the circle, and that's giving you something a bit more like a sort of a different shape to bring. Obviously you can mould the tissue into different shapes beforehand, but you can just then lift some of these moments out, and you can bring, and it gives you quite a nice sort of subtle, like sort of ghosting effect. You sort of can lift out and bring highlights kind of coming through, and that's very useful for doing effects of light on trees and that kind of thing. Right, so that's got some green onto there, and I think doing this sort of shaping, I can show you just even with your thumb, if you just press it on, or your finger, and lift it off and leave almost like a fingerprint, it starts to have a quite different sort of dappled like texture. And you can use, obviously, different fingers give different sized moments. And so that's sort of like hopefully giving us something a bit more, something else to explore a bit later on. Right, so I don't think we're going to need to do a lot more in the painting. If you want to do more and just see what it takes, if you've got really into adding a bit, absolutely do. But as I said, this should be very responsive and to what you think you want to do with it. I'm not trying to dictate what anyone does. It's just leading it through the process. But we've now got obviously a very wet surface, so the next thing is to dry the surface off, and then we're going to start looking, almost looking with our pens and exploring some of the shapes that we've got there. So I'm going to mute just for a couple of minutes so I can hair dry my piece, because nobody wants to hear me to share the noise of my hairdryer with them, and then we will get back together once our papers are nice and dry. Okay, right. Okay, so we've now got our paper is dry and we've got these sort of areas of shape and colour in here. Obviously, whatever you've done is completely different to what I've got. It's maybe a similar kind of format, but it should basically be your own creation. And that's fantastic, because really what I'm showing you is just a technique of creating these sort of abstract images on top. So as I said, we're really just going to focus on circles and what you can do with circles together. On later ones we'll use different shapes and get more complicated shapes, so we're just going to think circles. I'm starting off with I want a 0.5 pen. I generally feel when you're doing this sort of thing, if you start with a medium pen, you can go thicker and you can go lighter, if you know, as you sort of get into the swing of it. And I hope that we've also got something roughly like this with this sort of large kind of blue kind of circular area in here. So to begin with, I'm just looking for the outline of the shape here. I want to kind of do a circle, but where I can, I want to follow the edge of the paint. So to just come round and follow the shape. I can come away from the edge, but I just want to kind of put a circular form into the artwork. So I'm just going to work my pen round, and I'm kind of thinking circle, and then occasionally if I find like there's a lovely edge coming up here, I'm going to follow that edge round. And of course, when I say for circle, I am not talking in any way about geometric perfect circles. I'm talking about soft freehand circles that exist like sort of soft bubbles. And then I'm going to come around and do another one kind of going around. So again, I've got another kind of ray or kind of loop of paint coming around there. So I'm just following that kind of edge round. And I'm going to keep those separate, I think, and then just follow around that white bubble and then come through. And I'm going to overlap the pink a little bit just to sort of bring these edges round. So I've got a nice hint of pink coming into that sort of circle there. And I'm starting to sort of see that shape there. And again, I think with these ones, I'm going to half do a not complete circle. So again, I can just see a little spread in the paint there. So I'm just following that with my pen just to give it a kind of shape. So it's not meant to be a pure circle at all. And then I'm going to come round, and I've got a tiny little dog leg here. So I'm going to kind of go up and down again around it. But you're going to find your own shapes and your own moments in the paint. You just might see something that, oh, I just really want to pick that up. Like I've got a line kind of down here that I'm following, so I'm quite enjoying that line, so I'm just going to follow it. And you sort of think, I always feel with these ones, you think, oh gosh, I can't see anything to draw. And you think, oh, well, I see one thing to draw, so I'll do that. And then where do I go next? Well, let's just find the next bit. There's a bit here, look, I can do a circle to kind of draw that round and make that into a moment on my picture. I can just draw that round. So that's this kind of circle that's up here. And as I come up here, I've got some moments here. I've got quite a nice dapple there. So I can just decide that's kind of going to be my next sort of circle. Almost like sort of blowing bubbles. Kind of coming round. And there we go. I'm getting a little bit of background noise. Would my people just mind checking that they're on muted, just because it's can be a bit distracting for other students? That'd be wonderful, thanks. And then I'm going to come around again, just got an edge here to follow, so I'm just thinking, just looking a little bit ahead and following round just the line that I've sort of got, and the paint has kind of created for me. That's all we're kind of doing, just to sort of moving that round and just kind of finding the little shapes and little moments. And then of course this gives me gaps, it gives me spaces in between. So if I come a little bit closer in, so we can just sort of see onto that sort of surface there. oh, come on, my bouncy camera stand, there we go. I've got space in between here, so maybe what I can do is just bring some of my small circles into this kind of area here, just little ones, and again in between them might be little gaps, and then you might decide to put a smaller one in again. Just a few little sort of close texture moments that you can just pick out and see how they fit in. And I've got a sort of bump here, so maybe I'm going to fit a circle that fits into that kind of bump, so I'm starting to get some surface and some texture. I've got another line coming around here, so I'm going to take that up round and just follow that edge, just see where the paint takes you, let your pen just follow that and kind of come round and see what shape it is. And when you hit a blank blue space, you can decide then where you want to take that line, and mine's just sort of coming round on this sort of moment here. So my idea is that we just keep slowly looking for all these little bits. We've got this sort of, I've got a bit here, and of course again you're not going to have this necessarily, but you may have something even more gorgeous. But you've got this lovely edge here where the pink and the kind of blue has really kind of merged together. So I can just sort of, I'm just starting to pick out the darker pink moments on here, just with little tiny circles, just sort of putting them on and down. And I'm kind of like leaving the little blue bits in between and just trying to draw around some of the pink bits. Just sort of finding the edge there. So I'm just starting building up some shapes here, and then maybe I can find a bump there, and that's going to become more of a kind of ovally shape, and then they kind of come around. So it's almost like a little edge, like a kind of coral reef, that's a hard word to say, just kind of building up sort of in there. And we're just going to bring some larger shapes and some smaller shapes. And I've got some sort of really broken up bits here. Look, there's a sort of blue bit there I can draw. It's kind of like a little pink moment floating inside blue, so I'm almost just kind of outlining it and just kind of seeing, just drawing attention to it, kind of to see where it goes. This edge is quite strong, so I want to really build up some little dark shapes all the way along here to kind of enhance that. But again, I'm just following that edge there. And what I want you to be doing is looking at the paint and the paper that you have and seeing what shapes are hiding in there for you, what things in your paint you're going to find. And this is why I say that we don't do the whole, we're probably unlikely to do all of this in one session, because you can go away and you can spend some quiet time throughout the rest of the week just finding some more of these shapes and these kind of moments and just building up and getting your circles kind of smaller and smaller and more intricate, and it starts to build up. This whole kind of composition starts to appear out of the paint that you've put down. So as I come down, we had some moments in the green section, didn't we, where we took these little white patches here where we've taken a tissue or a finger, dry finger, or even a dry brush, and just slightly pulled the paint back off the surface, so we get this sort of light moment. So like if you've got a one like this, a sort of greenish one, I'm going to come around and I'm just following the edge of it kind of round. Again, I mean, I say circle, it's a very wibbly wobbly circle. It's not a pure circle at all, and I quite like that. It's sort of almost, and then I can this one's got slightly sort of like lily leaf kind of feel to it, lily pad kind of feel with a kind of colour, and then I can come round inside that and just start following that little white edge and just sort of make that kind of more obvious. And then I've got another shape here, so this starts to become maybe like a cluster of sort of greenery or seed pods or flowers or leaves, and it's sort of like, because we've used this combination of the blue and this sort of, and then this sort of dark green, we start to sort of make sense of it by seeing this as being more like foliage or kind of leaves, because they're lower down and they look like ground. And I think that's quite a nice thing to sort of play with. So we're not saying this is flowers, but it kind of has that kind of feel, and we can find more of these moments going through all this green. And I'm just trying to follow, if I see like a little lovely dark green spot there, so I would definitely want to sort of draw around that and include that. It's almost like our drawn line is almost framing elements of this and drawing attention to it, and getting and saying, look at this lovely sort of moment here, this sort of softness. And where I've got this bank of like sort of clouds almost behind, I can just divide it up and just take little moments of colour kind of in coming around there. So I'm just sort of getting like quite a layered feel. I've got one here that's kind of looking sort of peering around the corner of my paper, so I can just take that and sort of draw that round And then with some of these, once you've got a line drawn in, it's quite nice to try drawing around it again to sort of just give that visual kind of echo of it coming round. And maybe one of the inside ones you can do a double as well, so it kind of gives that feel of there being two, you know, sort of like, it is like an echo, I suppose, isn't it? Like a sort of moment of dropping a stone into a water, that kind of moment. And then we can build up on some of these. So again, we might take another one kind of coming round, and I'm just hitting a little white in the blue kind of moment there, so I can then add that, and that sort of gives that even more kind of stature and strength, make that one quite sort of big. So let's come down here and get some of the ones around here. I think take around, you can take a sort of average of all the points as well on the shape, and then and other times you might choose to kind of follow that cloudy shape a bit more, and just it's just amazing how drawn into it you get, and how much you start sort of like, you know, you get quite excited when you find an interesting shape. You go, oh look, I'm going to have to draw around that one, that's really good. So I'm just going to come in, and I'm going to fill in here with some smaller kind of little circles just to kind of fill in that shape around there. We're really focusing on circles today. As we go on, we'll look at different marks and different sort of lines and things as we try different backgrounds. But I'm just thinking about all these kind of the loosest definition of circles. If you want to call them blobs, you know, feel free to call them blobs, because they're much more organic than very geometric shapes. And then I've got a really lovely moment here where I'm getting all sorts of lovely pale blue kind of shapes kind of coming around. I've got another edge, look, coming down here where I've got a strong moment of paint coming down through that. And again, because we've got this sort of strong edge up here, if you remember the circles on this one, we might choose just to do the same kind of treatment again, just putting in little tiny but tight circles onto the edge. So I'm just following that moment where the pink has formed like a little margin, a tide mark, just so that it becomes almost like a structure. Just different sizes of circles, just moving along and down, just to where that strong pink is. And somehow when you draw a line around an area of colour, or draw a circle like this, it kind of makes it more intensified. It sort of turns up the volume, makes it stronger looking. So that's really just because if we sort of again bring the camera back on my one, I've got another little row of them up here, haven't I? So it's kind of bringing that sort of connection together. I've got a very strong triangular kind of form in here, so I'm going to sort of be aware of that. I'm going to do a circle around this dark patch here, and then bring some of these lines out. And really the whole point of this is we're not trying to create, we're creating without a kind of end goal in mind. What we're trying to do is lose ourselves in some of the patterns and some of the shapes, and just seeing what the paint has given us. So a lot of practice, you know, you might have an end goal in mind, like I want to draw a picture of a tree or plant or whatever, but with this it's kind of, I don't know what I'm going to end up with, I don't know where it's going to take me, and I want to keep it quite sort of abstract. Here I'm just putting in a little tiny second kind of line around, and another sort of close sort of one, and that starts to kind of give it kind of form. And then so if I'm thinking about some of the things that lines can do, if we go, and I'm just going to move over to this one, this sort of nice green moment here, because it's nice and strong. We can sometimes use some of these lines to help kind of get form kind of going on. So if I've got my circular shape like that, and then maybe I'm going to identify this white shape, I'm going to follow that round and make that look like, so it's maybe like an opening or a kind of part of a plant. But what I can also do is bring some lines onto this edge, but then give them a curve, and these sort of curved lines start to perhaps help to make this look like it's like a little fat seed head or something. Like if I just sort of bring these curved lines round, it's like the way you see those marks going around a pumpkin, you know, where you see the dividing lines sort of going round, and that starts to give that form, so it's not just a flat surface, it starts to kind of stand out against its background a bit. And if you ever want to get shadow into a sort of more abstract, if you want to do a bit of tone, you just need to put more shapes into it, because every time you put a line on the surface, you're adding black or sort of darkness onto your surface. So if you do some sort of closer together, you're putting more dark onto your surface. So if you sort of like take a front edge like this of a shape and just put a few more extra lines in like that, that sort of starts to look a bit more shadow. And if you sort of step back, you can see how this has the kind of more shadowed feel, and then this side looks a little bit brighter. And it's just because you've put some more lines in. So let's see and have another go at this shape. The camera is not brilliant at focusing on stuff that isn't exactly in front of it, because it's obviously, they don't make cameras for art classes, they make cameras for you to look good at a Zoom meeting. So all the settings are about, you know, blotting out the crow's feet and not focusing on the watercolour, I'm afraid. So I've just put again that little centre in, so that becomes like a little sort of leaf stalk or something on the top like that. And again, I'm just going to use some curved lines. So once you've got a shape like this to work in, you can bring these sort of curves out. And if you think of it a little bit like going around a clock face, although they're curved, you kind of curve them down at the bottom section. Then as you come up, they curve towards the sides. And then as you come up to the sort of 12 o'clock section, you can kind of curve them up. And that really helps to get that sort of plush pumpkin little gourd kind of feel going on, and the sort of the lovely blooms of paint kind of behind that start to look like a surface on a sort of vegetable or a seed head kind of flowery kind of thing going on. And again, if you then put a few more in front, that just helps to give that a little bit more shadow. And you can even do like halfway ones if you just do little half lines following that curved shape, but it just adds like a little bit of shadow kind of coming around. I don't know what these are. I don't know what kind of mysterious and wondrous foliage we've got going on here, but if we sort of come back and sort of think about the whole thing now, we have got a kind of a feeling of something growing down here. And then if we like that sort of line technique, you can come back onto these ones. And, I just need to tighten that clip on my board. There we go. So it just wiggled a bit. There we go. We can come back and sort of, where I've got this sort of big one here, we can do little half moon lines coming around on one of those smaller borders. And again, the half moon shape kind of helps to make it look a little bit like it's a ridge sticking out. So I can just come round and maybe put a little circle. And then I could continue on to this larger pale side. I can put my curved lines in, and they're just going to make that look like another kind of sort of fat shape coming around. If you've got a little moment like here where your line's doing a wiggle, if you kind of go into the valley of the wiggle, as it were, and bring that line up, the valley of the wiggle, that sounds quite good, doesn't it? And then that's kind of helps to kind of make that shape look like segments, look like some sort of exotic fruit that we're drawing. And I can bring these around. And weirdly enough, these are all techniques that once you've sort of explored them in this very relaxed, you know, it doesn't really matter if you get it right or wrong, it's just an abstract kind of a field. You can use lines like this in drawings with more direction. If you're trying to do something that's round, you know, you can kind of use this technique to create forms on more representational pieces afterwards. So I'm just going to start putting some little circles kind of into this sort of green section here. They start to look like, again, like texture or perhaps a surface area going on. I can just fit some more. And again, where you've got, you're drawing small circles clustering along a shape, they are adding a little bit of shadow along with the pattern. So where you've got, if you want to make these little gaps between look more shadowed, you can just pack in some little tiny circles really close together. And then you can see how that starts to look like shadow. See how far that now has really made that gap really deep and dark looking. And it just starts to give this more, again, more kind of 3D feel. It's quite interesting how, though these are completely random shapes created by paint, just by using these sort of techniques, we can give them a lot of character. And I start off always by just seeing, I've got a lovely little tiny line of paint just come, I can barely see it, but I can just about make it out like a little margin between light green and dark green. So I can just draw around that, and that gives me somewhere to start. And I'm not trying to invent a shape, I'm following the shape that's there. I'm discovering what's hidden into my drawing and then working on it, you know, to build that much more. Now obviously if I was doing a whole, if we had like 3 hours, I could just sit and do the whole of this bit, but I'm going to sort of pop up and have a look at some of the rest of it so that you, when you've got some more time, you could continue building up these sort of strange alien forest that we've sort of started planting down the bottom. But let's go up and have a look at what's happening up in the sky while we're here. So let's bring my camera up, and we can look at kind of the sky angle here. So I think for this section I'm going to swap to a thinner pen, just because I think it's got a nice feel sometimes to have, because this is kind of like a lighter, you know, it's sort of up the top of the picture, we're going to maybe use a thinner line to kind of bring some sort of shapes in. So I'm going to start by just, I've got lots of sort of speckly surfaces here. So if you're not sure, because sometimes you just go, oh, I don't know where to start. As I say, just find the first thing that you think you can start on, and then the rest will slowly start to follow. So I'm just going to draw, almost like, imagine it as like bubbles or clouds. I'm just drawing round some of the areas again, just so that I've got where I can see spots. I'm just going to pick them out to form like a kind of bubbly surface. And it's a bit like one of those skies, you know, they call it a mackerel sky, where the sea looks like, not the sea, the sky has incredible white dotty clouds across it. It looks like a fish scale. I believe it's meant to herald a change in the weather or some kind of weather event. I can't just never remember which it is, but if you've ever seen them, then you know what I'm talking about. There was a vicar in the 1740s. There's always a vicar who's got time on his hands, I expect, and he was the first person to start mapping the clouds and understanding all the shapes in them, and he produced his beautiful illustrated book of clouds, which has formed the basis of the start of meteorology. But it's a fascinating book, always amazing cloud shapes. So I could just get some more of these. I don't think he had perfectly round blue clouds though, but in this world we do. So I'm just going to pick out some darker moments where I can sort of cluster these sort of lines in. I've got this lovely edge where the blue is coming down next to the pink, and as we're getting some again, the clustering of the circles is bringing in some darkness. I think I want to kind of build that up again. So just by following that edge again, and then just turning some of those bumps into circles, coming back away from that edge. And if you leave a little space, the great thing about circles is you can infinitely squeeze circles in between circles. As you get tinier and tinier gaps, you can just put tinier and tinier circles in between them, and then you kind of soften those gaps. I'm going to put a couple of echoing ones in. So it's doing the same thing, but it's funny how, because we're doing it over blue paint over here, it doesn't have quite the same, it doesn't sort of feel like plants in the same kind of way. And I think that's lovely, the way that the same shapes appear but do very different things. I just feel the need to cluster some small circles around this large one to be in sort of a bit more of a pattern, and maybe do another sweep of line coming round. It's going to stop when it hits the white though. It's just going to be an arc kind of coming round there. I'm going to continue down this edge here, just gently working down, finding there's little tiny moments of paint in that margin between the two colours. And then hopefully what we're seeing is, as we build up the texture and the tone by putting more circles in, this edge becomes darker and the pink in the middle starts to get more and more vibrant, because when you're painting, one of the key things to think about, particularly with watercolour, is you can't really make stuff lighter. It doesn't go lighter than you've got, because you start off with white paper as being your brightest colour, and then you put tone on and it's always going darker and darker. So if you need to make an area of your painting glow and have more light about it, what you can think about doing is putting a darker tone around the area you want to be light. So as we build up these circles across this sort of blue area, in contrast, if we leave this pink area just without any drawing on it, and just keep it as a big expanse of bright glowing pink, it starts to get even more iridescence coming through. It looks like a sort of break between the clouds maybe, or a light shining down with a lovely sort of sunset pink glow. And it's just quite a nice effect to get in just by establishing this blue edge and drawing in and making it firmer. It allows the pink to kind of really glow through. And if you keep the circles small, again what you're doing is putting more black pen onto the surface, so you're increasing the darkness that you can add in. And we can just come down, and I've got my big sort of circle that's happening here, and I've got all these sort of bits, like I've got bits shooting off here as well, so perhaps we should think about some of these. And so I can follow that line round and then bring it round. And because it's kind of overlapping, I'm going to do some overlapping just by, when I get to a bit that's coming down, I can stop my pen and kind of lift it off and start it again the other side. Then it looks like one bit is going on top of the other one. So I don't know if you can see that quite here, because it's a slightly far angle, but you can see if I then stop the pen, and then with this straight line here, if I then follow that down, I can bring that across, and then just that little end of that curve is poking out there, and then I can bring that kind of coming around there. And it looks like then we start to see this as a layer, don't we? We start to see this curve here as something poking out from underneath, and it becomes layering, and it becomes perspective, and it just helps you sort of get a sense of different points in the picture like that. So you've got that little sort of moment there. I've got quite a nice big sort of spray up here, which I want to do something with, but I can definitely see a nice dark corner here. So I'm going to start off by drawing some dark lines, dark circles, just ordinary big circles really, just filling in that space where I've got that nice bit of dark dark blue paint, just to kind of come around that and get some, these could almost be like sort of strange raindrops kind of clustering in the sky, really, in this strange and unearthly atmosphere. But I can just bring some of these big loops in, almost like snails. I'm kind of liking this sort of like echo kind of feel, so I want to bring some of that feel into some of the other shapes. So I'm doing again more of these echo points, but just trying to keep them with a nice sort of rhythm moving round. And you can kind of like, because they're the curves, they kind of draw the eye down. So if you kind of see a curve, then your eye follows this curve, then it follows this curve round, and then maybe we need to bring some curves into this side so it kind of spirals over that way. But we'll see how we get on. I can see a dark patch inside this circle, so I'm going to just follow that and make that into a half moon, or a kind of circular feel, just not all the way around, but just sort of part of it, like here. And there's like a sort of space here, so let's claim that bit of blue. There we go. And this one here, this has got like quite a definite faint white section at the top, so I'm going to make that more obvious just by drawing around it. And this is kind of what we can start doing, is then looking into some of these shapes, like this one here. It's got a definite stripe kind of going through the middle, so let's outline that with a pen and make that almost like the veining in a marble or something coming sort of round here. And then all of these ones, when you look back into them, now that you've drawn that circle round, they've suddenly, you can sort of see there's a little white patch in that one, so I can draw that round. And this one's got a more larger white patch kind of going through there. And obviously yours are going to have different white patches to the ones I have, because they're all based on what your paint's given you, but you might find patterns inside some of these circles. So once you've drawn a circle around a bit, you've kind of claimed, you staked your territory. You can then kind of go in and explore that individual circle and kind of see what you've got going on inside it, and then they start to look like little marbles or kind of worlds in their own right. And these two here on the edge here, they've got a tiny bit of pink, almost like some reflected colour. So again, I can just decide to draw where that kind of goes around. And this large one here on this side, this has got a lovely bit of pink, kind of just really mixing where it meets the blue. So again, I can sort of claim that and draw around it. And these ones, these are some of the first ones that I've done, and that one had a definite pink sort of spot in the middle, which I saw but only just in passing. But now I can come back and have a look and just pick out some of these moments where I get nice obvious patterns like that. And you'll find this, that you sort of do the first bit and then you sort of go away and you come back and go, actually there's a load more patterns I'm discovering inside my sort of circle areas, things I wasn't expecting to find, straight away. So let's take another, I think I fancy doing another arc just through here, just almost, sometimes you can, it's completely up to you, you can sort of like ignore the paint marks and just kind of draw on top, and sometimes you want to really follow them. I'm seeing a kind of movement here on mine where I'm getting this, and you can see the way these are slightly opening apart and sort of spreading wider. I can then bring a line maybe to kind of echo that kind of movement just coming through. I'm hitting a little bubble of white there, so I'm going to go around that and then off into that blue zone, like coming through there. And again, just bringing that line again, just sort of coming through and going round that white and then across. And I see I've got sort of like, I don't know, it's a slight sort of, there's a relationship, I think, between the way these are kind of spreading down kind of that way, which I think is quite nice. I think I want to put another one through here. You'll just have to see how, you know, your shapes, you know, you might have a different movement, you might have a different kind of feel kind of coming round. And then you might decide, you know, we could make these look like sort of layers quite well if we sort of brought in some circles just coming along here, because they add a bit of texture. But again, as I said before, when you draw them and you put them in close together, they're also adding a bit of tone. So it's sort of making this line a bit darker and a bit more defined, which kind of gives that edge. It makes there sort of like another cliff edge almost kind of through here. Just sort of bring those along. And again, if you pack them in really tight together, then they're going to be darker, and that sort of starts to bring that across. Just going to move my board that way a little bit. There you go. You might see it a bit better when they're sort of front on. But yeah, that's sort of like almost like a seashore, isn't it, with a little sort of stones building out to that edge. And then I can do some more just coming in under here. Again, just tightly in and just clustering along those sort of lines just to kind of give them weight. And you can see how it starts to look like ridges or steps kind of almost going down, because these are acting like a little shadow for the line above. And it's just a way of building up surface and depth, and changing this from being a sort of flat expanse of wet watercolour that we've carefully dried with our hair dryers into something that has sort of a bit more depth and sort of body to it. Again, I'm just going to do one more of these lines just so we can really get the effect, hopefully. And it's lovely when you get this sense of things sort of fading in and out, or sort of layers and shapes starting to work in together. But you can see why I say this is not something you can just do in one quick session. And it's really quite nice because you can keep it going throughout the week. You know, you can have this sitting there, and now that it's dry, it doesn't need any more wet paint. You can kind of do this anywhere. And I kind of recommend, you know, it's the sort of thing you can really do in front of the TV, which I know sounds awful, but actually sometimes that works really well, because if you're half watching whatever your, you know, Netflix show you're on at the moment, and at the same time just drawing this, it's very relaxing, and your brain kind of goes into autopilot, and you can look down and think, oh, that's a nice bit. I don't remember doing that bit, but that's a nice bit. I'll do some more like that, you know, and I bet you'll still work out who done it or whatever, without almost realising that you're doing it. So you see, hopefully this is sort of giving me a nice sort of sense of layering, and I can like continue this all the way up to sort of get a little bit more shadow kind of in here if I want to. If you sort of are really enjoying this a technique and you think this is working, but you want to kind of really exaggerate it to sort of bring more impact with it, and you sort of really like where this is going, you can always go to using a darker pen just to, again, if you use a slightly thicker and heavier pen just to sort of draw some of these, then again that adds a bit more shade. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to swap to a point, where are we, 0.8, no 5, I'm trying to find a 0.8 because that's my chunkier pen. Oh, here we go. No, that's a 0.1, that's the opposite of what I want. Well, it was here 2 minutes ago. The workshop fairies have clearly run off with it again. But I've got a 0.5, which I don't want to hold us up, so we'll do that. But again, you can come, if you just do just close to the line in a darker or a thicker pen, just again, smaller circles worked in, that starts to give that as an extra edge of shadow. Just along there, just see that just makes that look darker. Can you see that's now given us a contrast between the two? And so I'm going to come in and do it again on here, just doing in some tinier circles, again because the line is heavier and blacker and thicker, and it's just putting a little bit of extra in like that, just sort of coming out. And then if you want to still have texture, if you then swap to a very thin pen, so yes, I want my 0.1 that leapt up beforehand, I can then do larger and then finer line circles kind of coming along that. because the finer line obviously has less, it's a more subtle impact, so it looks lighter. And if I do bigger circles that fill up that space, there's less pen going on the paper, so they start to look softer and lighter because there's less darkness. And it's still putting texture on the surface if you want texture, but it's not, it's going to keep that effect of the steps and the ridges kind of coming to get it without sort of overwhelming it, but it's going to bring some surface on, so you could come along and do all those kind of lines. So really it's just like a sort of balancing act of going, stepping back and saying, okay, so where do I want bits to get darker, where do I want them to get lighter, or stay lighter rather. And so if I just want to get something darker, then I can go in with my heavier pen, my darker pen, put more circles in, more shapes in, because the more you put in, and you can overlap them, you can draw on top, you know, it's fine. Just if you want to really enhance that shadow and kind of give it extra drama, like that. So that's sort of just, you can see hopefully we're still getting that effect, but it's now bringing that sort of surface all the way over. And we use that sort of curved lines, didn't we, to kind of get a curved surface happening. So let's see how that works on perhaps one of this blue shape up here. I'm going to build up to it. I'm going to build some shadow in along this edge here because I want to see what this is doing. So I'm going to keep this as steps, I think, again, just to sort of build in. And I'm just going to draw along here. I'm going to mute while I'm drawing just for 30 seconds so I can have a quick slurp of tea, because I don't want to share my tea slurps with you, but I'm getting a dry throat, so I'll just for 1 minute do that while I draw along this edge here. There we go, I'm back. I am teed up. So again, I've just sort of built that up here, and then I think I'm going to continue this line in here as well, just to make this look kind of shadowed, just by bringing these sort of lines round. And you can see if you go really small like this and you want to get into these really delicate sort of details, there's sort of hours and hours of work you can do on these, and it's lovely and relaxing. One of the tips I have is if you've got a long journey, it's quite hard to take an A3 piece of paper if you've got a train journey. It's difficult to do when you're driving, I'll grant you that, but if you've got a plane journey, if we ever get to go on planes again, you can kind of do a whole load of backgrounds and then cut them into smaller pieces and divide them up and make almost like a little A5 size pages, and then you've got something to keep you going on, you know. And far be it from me to suggest this, but if you've got a long and tedious Zoom meeting, you can kind of sneak them in below your camera and have a little, and you don't have to, it's lovely because you don't have to think, it's not like trying to do a painting of a country cottage or something where you have to think about it. With these, you're just really doodling and putting in these marks, and again, you won't zone out totally, I hope, and miss the important part of your meeting. But you know, if you get caught, it wasn't my idea. But you know, it's just a lovely way of having little pieces you can have to hand to kind of play with, you know, as to fit in. So where I've got this nice sort of curved shape here, I'm going to turn that into something a bit like a kind of crescent. I'm following, it's because my paint is almost doing a crescent moon shape, so I figured, you know, I'll just sort of keep that on like that. So I've got like a sort of crescent moon kind of appearing in there. So again, because I've started to build up these edges as like sort of ridges, I can come in and I can go round the moon in the same way, just to kind of give that a little bit of shadow. And again, just bring that surface in, but then we're starting to get like a sort of moon shape kind of isolated or kind of sticking out from the surface. And I can bring some of the lines that we used sort of down below we can then sort of bring those maybe to kind of give this an extra sense of things sort of curling out from there. So that moon, is that, oh, this is going to be quite fun. Is the moon a hole going in or a bump sticking out? I don't know. As I'm looking at it, I keep changing my opinion as to whether it's a hole going in or a ridge sticking out. It's how funny, isn't it? Because your sort of brain isn't 100% sure what you're looking at, so it doesn't have a reference point, so it keeps kind of trying to see it in different ways. So we can decide as we go around which way we're going with it, but I can use some of these lines as well, and even down on these sort of step areas I can use some nice rays coming out as well, just to kind of change up the surface a bit. So this one, just sort of bring them down, and maybe on this little ridge here, these ones can have a bit more of a curl to them. So we're getting all sorts of different surfaces building up, just to sort of come around. And yeah, so I don't know whether that's going in or popping out yet. I haven't decided. What am I going to do around here? Oh, this is going to be fun. Right, so I think I'm going to continue my little shapes kind of clustering. Or am I? Because I'm just thinking I could then change direction and kind of cluster around the inside of that. Let's do that, because I don't know what it's going to look like. And that could be quite interesting. It might be terrible, but, you know, this is the great thing about this. It's a doodle, it's an abstract, so nobody knows what it's meant to be, so no one can tell you you've got it wrong. That's why it's so lovely and relaxing. Nobody can say, you know, oh, that doesn't look right. They can just say, what beautiful colours, and look at those intricate patterns you put on, and aren't you patient, and isn't that lovely? That's why I find it so lovely and positive, you know. No one can mark you out of 10 because it doesn't exist in 10 in this sort of universe. It's lovely. So let me come round on this edge up here. I think that looks all right. Why not? Why not? Let's, you know. You haven't got to obey the laws of perspective, which is fantastic. So again, you're not trying to do anything representational. You can just do all sorts of drawing and all sorts of things, and just think about the patterns that you've got going on and the way they kind of twist and curl. Oh, a little curl's appeared in there. Look, I've done a little doodly curl. Why not? Again, you can create all sorts of surfaces and moments going on, and if you like drawing, you can even, if these start to look like creatures, you can turn them into creatures. I saw a fantastic I don't know if I'll be able to find her again. Lovely Girls are on one of my Facebook groups the other day, and she does these really big abstract, like very, very expressive paintings, and then she turns them into characters. So one of them was absolutely lovely. When it was finished, it turned into a sort of monster with a hat on, carrying a briefcase with a big grin on his face. But, you know, it started from just big slaps of paint, and you didn't know where it was going to go. It was really, really fun. And so sometimes it's just having this sort of background, first of all. It's a lot to do with the theory of, you know, a big white page in a sketchbook is really quite daunting, actually, because it's sort of all pristine and white and lovely and beautiful. And you think, oh, gosh, I don't want to put anything on this. This is always my argument about how they should make sketchbooks out of scraps of envelopes and things, because all my best drawings, or what I'm thinking of that, tend to be on scraps of paper, and I think it's because you take a risk when it's a scrap of paper. I'm just putting in some rays here to see what they look like. You know, you don't feel like you have to be precious, so you sort of scribble on a bit of paper and it starts going really well, and you go, oh, this is great. But then if you get presented with a beautiful, pristine, expensive hardback sketchbook, you never do a drawing that feels good enough to be in the sketchbook. You kind of think, oh, I won't use my sketchbook because I'm only going to do some little fiddly sketching and I don't want to spoil it, you know. And then it just remains empty on your shelf. I am speaking from personal experience here. And then you sort of have all these stacks of loose paper that have got all the really good stuff on. So I think by putting a background like this on, even if you're doing quite a representational drawing, but just sort of like messing up the paper so it's got colour on it, it's got surface on it before you get into your drawing, I find it really useful and it's very freeing. I'm just following a little pink edge that I've seen against this blue, and it can often be, you know, a really useful technique to kind of free up and get things moving if you're a bit intimidated by white paper, and it can be desperately intimidating. Right, so what am I going to do here? Because now I've got this sort of big space in here. This is getting really quite intricate, isn't it? So perhaps what I'm going to do is come round and now echo that space. And I think this is why it's really good to sort of do this. You know, as I'm sort of talking away, I'm sort of half thinking about what I'm doing and half thinking about what I'm going to say. So it kind of, again, helps my brain to turn off a bit. And then sometimes I look down and I go, oh, I didn't know I was going to do that. That's nice. I think that's when your creative side gets a real chance to come out and play. So that's quite nice. Look, those sort of ripples just echoing that shape going in and in. Again, it's got a feeling a bit maybe of wood grain now, or the kind of veins on a piece of an ammonite or some sort of fossil. It's got quite a fossily feel, this, hasn't it? As if it's something lovely you've picked up on the beach. So yeah, I've got some more blue here, so I'm going to come in. I'm going to leave those white bits completely undrawn upon, so they're going to look more like holes kind of coming through. So again, if I put more marks and circles into these sort of areas here, we're going to start really getting that feeling that you could almost put your hand out and pick up that edge, or you'd see something behind it just by leaving that white paper. You know, it looks really, by making this darker, this really does look like light coming through it, or a space in something. You can do something completely different actually, and do like the other way and draw in all the white spaces and leave the colour, and that has a very different kind of feel. It's quite worth experimenting with all these different approaches, and we will do some as we go through the weeks after this. But it just kind of gives it a really different feel, and there's something, I don't know what it is, something about outlining a shape like that in the paper just gives it a lot of presence and a lot of moment. You know, makes it sort of into something where it's just a space, but then by drawing around it, you kind of make it into something. You find its sort of personality. So I've got this sort of layer in between these two ridges. So I'm going to just put straight lines in this section, just kind of fanning round, just so I've got a different surface between these two areas. Just sort of moving around like that, just so that it's doing something a bit different. What's going to happen when I go onto the pink? Oh, I haven't decided yet, so let's see what happens when I get round there. I'm building up, but it's definitely working into the sort of pink section, kind of coming around here. This bottom bit looks quite slightly different, so something's got to happen, something's got to change. So I'm going to start giving it a curl. It's kind of like almost like it's dangling now. My lines are appearing over this sort of almost brilliant pink, like sort of lava somehow. The pink has gained real power now. It's got all these sort of contrasting black lines near it. And I'm just going to bring that round, and it's sort of just turning into slightly curly, curved lines rather than straight ones as it comes around, just to meet into that little bit there. So there we go. So you don't, as I said, it's really not about hours of planning this. It's very, very much always responding to what's here and what's happening on your paper, and seeing how these things can fit together. And as I said, sometimes you really don't know what you're going to do. As your pen gets closer to a bit, you're really not sure. You're just sort of exploring and working your way around and finding your way through. So let's step back for a moment and see where we've got to see where we might kind of go. So now we can see we've got, I mean, I say it's sky, but it's much more like sort of ammonites and fossils kind of on this side, almost like a sort of building coming to build up, like some strange sort of alien temple. There you go, it's quite a good one, being built kind of coming up here. And then down below we've got this sort of lovely green forest again. So let's have a look, because you see when you stepped away you've kind of forgotten what those green shapes look like, and now as you come back to look at them, if the camera will sit still, there we go, they think, oh, I could get some more detail in those. You thought they were quite detailed at first, but now you're thinking, actually, look, I can come in and I can get some more sort of surface texture into some of these areas, and maybe some more kind of curling lines, just to kind of give them this sort of, looks like it could be, again, another kind of ridge. And often, if you sort of like do a bit one evening and then put it aside and come back the next evening, you sort of suddenly see all sorts of other bits you could explore in it that you didn't think were there when you first looked at it. But we're just constantly revisiting it and just seeing those little moments and lines that the paint's given us, just sort of curling through and finding shapes and colours, and we can sort of build up some of the sort of detail on these. Maybe these ones can have like little sort of spirally bits kind of coming round. That spiral looks quite tasty, doesn't it, on there? Let's put a spiral on here and see what that looks like. I tend to start out from the middle and just bring the spiral out, and then it can start to wobble and just form around the outside edge of the shape like that, so it's just got something else happening with it. You can just sort of find one here, and maybe I'm going to put a few more shapes into this, and then it can have some lines coming around just to give it some form again. And maybe there's a shape in here somewhere that will look more like a flower. I don't know, maybe we can get something that sort of to bloom against all this strange undergrowth here. But maybe these are flowers, maybe it's what they look like. But I can just bring more sort of lines in and just sort of get that, and these are going quite wobbly, and that's working quite, it's got a sort of feel, hasn't it, of sort of like petals and the veining that you get in leaves and things like that, just using these sort of lines on here. So we've definitely got, I don't know what's going to happen when these two moments meet up. We've got to think about that at some point. We've got to bring, if we're going to bring this sort of the shadowing kind of step kind of formation, I can just see maybe we could get one more kind of in here, sort of behind those sort of white lines, but curling kind of up there. So it's going to be interesting when those meet together. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it will be quite fun to explore. So we can put some sort of spirals in here. I definitely want there to be a difference between these two, so that you do get a moment where they sort of mix up. You see all the fruits of the forest. I feel they are the fruits of the strange alien forest down here. But we'll see. I don't know if we'll get onto that bit. Let's just do the last bit here, and then let's see if I can do that bit so we can see what's going to happen. I'm going to swap again to a larger pen just to put some shadow down these bits here. Let's do this one here because it's the nearest one to the fruit, and we can see what might happen. So let's just put, I'm just going along first of all and putting a row of little circles in just to bring the shadow that we need for that step kind of coming round and through. And that's it, just sort of a bit of darkness and small pieces just so that we're getting some shadow in, kind of coming through there. And I've got a white edge here, so I'm just going to draw that in. I think I'm going to pick that up now and see what shape that gives me in this sort of structure, or I don't know what it is, but sort of like area. So I've got that sort of coming up on this side, and then again, so I've got this one coming down here, so we can sort of bring that almost as if it's something part of it. You know, it could be again sort of strange towers, and this has got a nice sort of jaggedy edge there, which again looks like peaks and mountains maybe off into the distance. And I love the way these start off as being so kind of completely abstract, can't see anything in this whatsoever, and then you start to build up almost like stories in this and things, even though they still stay really kind of abstract, they certainly develop different characters. So I'm going to take that line down here as well. So this is going to be, I can come back later and put more circles along the edge like we've got up here, but I'm just going to draw that line in now. I've got a very faint area where the pink is just moving into the blue, so very delicately, but I can decide, you know, where that sort of comes, and this is definitely becoming a sort of structure, almost with like spirals of stripes coming through it like that. And then I can, so we're going to have, and I think what I'm going to do really is where this meets these kind of gourd shapes, I'm going to just come in and put loads of little tiny dark circles in to make this meeting point quite sort of dark, so it looks like it pushes. If I make it dark, it's going to bring this sort of gourd shapes kind of pushing forwards and making them into, giving them some shadow behind them. Because again, generally speaking, if you make something dark in a picture, it's going to make it look like a hollow, or kind of push it back, make it look like a hole. And then if you keep it light, it looks like a higher up point. So you can see you're having those sort of darker, smaller circles together is making this sort of large, pale shape kind of pop forwards quite a lot. So let's just keep on building some of those through. And then we've got that nice one. I'm not going to go completely dark and leave a little bit of light, and then we'll just maybe bring some along there as a kind of highlight. But then that's sort of given that kind of feel, hasn't it? Similar to, I think I've got some larger circles along the edge that I need to make a bit smaller and darker, just to put circles within circles. So that starts to, again, act as shadow, just to sort of push that edge back. And then I can continue, so all these edges under here, they've all got this little row of shadow making circles, which I can overlap again. But if I just put them in relatively quickly now, and hopefully that will give this sort of feeling. It's definitely starting to feel like a kind of column, or maybe it's an incredible crystal tree or something, kind of growing up from the forest below. But I think it's because of using the green colour. It definitely does have that kind of foresty feel. And we'll choose different colours each week and explore what each different colours kind of give us as we go through. But I think it's lovely with abstract because our brain's always trying to make sense of what we're seeing, and we start trying to see things in them, and we start saying, oh, that looks a bit like this and a bit like that, and it's just shapes really, but it's quite fun the way we can kind of come up with stories around these really kind of quite abstract forms that don't have any particular relationship to anything, but can be all sorts of things at the same. They can be everything and nothing at the same time, which I think is really nice. So I'm just going to bring in this last sort of row of shadows here, and it's just tiny little circles. It's in different size circles, and again, if you want to make it look shadowy, just put your circles closer together, and then it starts to bring more shadow onto the page because you're putting more pen on the and taking out more of the paper. And if you keep them empty and spread apart, they'll be lighter looking. That's all really. And I always say it every week, but it is just something that it's really worth remembering, that sort of very key. And so I've got the sort of darker line here and then I can swap to a thinner pen and again do larger circles, and they are giving texture and giving tone, but they're not as dark as the little tiny ones. They don't create that intense shadow effect. So you can get a different kind of feel. And what I might do is I build up some on the edge here, because that kind of also helps to make this stand out and give it a kind of 3D feel. But there we go, just moving around. So we're just about coming towards the end of our session now, and obviously not the end of our drawing, because there's plenty more that can be done. We haven't really touched this side at all. But equally, if you stop at this point and don't do any more, I don't think it will probably look unfinished, because again, it's fantastically abstract. So you can just say that it's just picked out some sort of key details. So there we go. Let me draw my camera back, and we can hopefully get a feel of how all of that is going. So we're sort of seeing all this we can see the way this looks like shadow now, these kind of ridges of sort of shadow coming through, and all this sort of detailing through here. And there's plenty more to do, and to keep us busy, keep us out of trouble for a whole week, I think, until we have another session. So there we go.